Okay, so we're looking at the second part now of religion, conflict, and challenges. So in the first video, we predominantly looked at kind of secular religious conflicts between, Hinduism and with, the British government. We looked at communism versus, just religion on general or in general, and then religion and a little bit of Buddhism, but mainly focusing on the Uyghurs in China. So to kind of more do religion on religious conflict more with this video, but we'll also bring it back to the idea of secularism and a few other ideas here too. So looking at another case study, looking at this time Ireland and Northern Ireland. All right. So if you look at this map, the census map of Belfast in 2011 is kind of this one on the would be the left-hand side for me, where the mouse is. And so the blue is Catholic, the red is the Protestant. So Protestant again being like Lutheran, Baptist, but predominantly within England, we're looking predominantly at Presbyterian, Methodists, things like that, and or Anglican too. And so where this division comes from, and so real quick, the splits in Christianity, the biggest ones, you have the Eastern Orthodox, they broke off around, or started breaking off, officially, about 1,000 years ago in about 1054, but there have been breaks before then. And then the really big one between, Catholics and what we consider Protestants that fits in with all those other groups, Lutherans, Calvinists, Baptists, Methodists, Lutherans, all, even Mormons to an extent, and a bunch of other groups. It doesn't happen until, the 20s, 1530s, when Martin Luther, who has been talking about, problems within the Catholic Church, talks about, okay, I'm going to go form my own church. We're still going to believe in Jesus Christ, but, there are things that we don't like about the Catholic faith, and break off from there. And so the King of England was essentially a stalwart in defending of the Catholic faith. This is Henry VIII, for those that know the story. But the thing is, Henry VIII was trying to have a son as an heir, and his wife would not produce. And so the Catholic Church at the time only allowed marriage or divorce in extreme measures. And Henry said, well, I'm going to essentially form my own church if you don't let me divorce. And the Pope said, I'm not going to let you divorce just because you can't sire a son in wedlock. And so what Henry did was he created his own church, the Church of England, and that is essentially the Anglican church that we know of today. And not all of Ireland went with that. Okay, parts of Ireland stayed Catholic, and that's also where Henry VIII, has 6 wives. That's a whole other thing. But that's kind of where that begins, and then there's tension between Catholics and essentially the Church of England. In England and Ireland and other places, and it starts a whole bunch of other religious conflicts that, between Catholics and Protestants that wage throughout Europe over the next 150 years or so. But yeah, so when we look at, much of Ireland is in itself, Protestant is, kind of essentially where Northern Ireland is. But the majority of even certain areas within Northern Ireland are predominantly Catholic. Right, as we can see here. And so this causes a lot of current problems because when Ireland decided to, split into two, it was in 1920, and it was predominantly split along religious lines, with Northern Ireland deciding to stay with the United Kingdom, which was, Great Britain, Scotland, and Wales, to form the United Kingdom because they were Protestant. And this, inside of Northern Ireland itself, created a lot of tension because a lot of Catholics did not want to be a part of the United Kingdom, didn't feel like they were going to get respect being Catholic in a Protestant land. And so, there's a lot of tension going back, hundreds of years over this. And that led to decades of violence, especially in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, even, since then, too, where the IRA, and Irish Republican Guard Army. I'm trying to remember the exact definition of the acronym here. But essentially a militia, you can even argue terrorist organization of Catholics, tried to use violence to try to unite and unsuccessfully all of Ireland and break off from the United Kingdom. Belfast is still segregated today with few interactions between certain groups. And, even though we don't have class time to do it, if we did, we would normally watch these videos. Great histories on Northern Ireland. So this one's from PBS. It's a great view of, still the religious tensions within Belfast. This one here in the middle is a good history of the IRA, very brief 5 minutes. And this one is just what it's like to be living in Belfast, another divided city. Kind of connecting to that other history of Northern Ireland video. But again, it gives a good overlay of kind of the reasons behind the tensions, what occurred. why the tensions still exist today, even though they have, tried to come to peace terms and have somewhat done that. But there's still a lot of harsh tension, and maybe there are hopes in the future for that it won't be as bad. But again, that's kind of something that was very, very big, especially if you are an Irish Catholic, something that you might be aware of within your history, or if you're a British Catholic or Irish Protestant, there is, that tension that still exists for those reasons. So looking beyond that, kind of switching gears now more towards the Middle East, we're going to look predominantly at the Middle East in itself. All right, so we're going to look at ISIS, Al-Qaeda, but also Israel and Palestine through this. So we want to understand, the idea of a fundamentalist, and this is for anything, not just religion, but a religious fundamentalist follows a strict, basic, literal interpretation of beliefs. So if you are a person that follows the Bible word for word, both Old and New Testament, everything that's written in there, you would be a fundamentalist. Just like if you were a, another example would be, somebody who believes 100% in evolution and all the doctrines of Darwin, you'd be a Darwinian fundamentalist. That's just kind of an example of that. But primarily we're talking about it in the context of religion. All right, helps keeping cultures unique and distinct, preserving cultural practices and values. So this is why we talk about, again, the idea of folk culture or more historical culture being preserved. All right, so to kind of tie in with the idea of ISIS and the Taliban, the Taliban having more current stay and historical, but ISIS being one that just, was big for, a couple of years in the Middle East. Now it's essentially gone, but the chances of ISIS popping up, or at least types of ISIS popping up again, there are still strong chances of that happening. So fundamentalist groups typically believe, especially when we talk about Islamic fundamentalist groups, or as many people continually coin them as extremist groups, and you got to be careful using those terms, because a fundamentalist isn't always an extremist or a terrorist. You got to be aware of that, right? But Islamic fundamentalists typically believe non-Islamic values, such as, Western ideals of Christianity or just Western secular things. Think about our pop culture, again, going back to all that stuff. And Buddhism are threats to Islam and brutally deal with dissidents and perceived threats. And this has happened time and again in the present day, but also it's happened under various other rulers who've viewed other religions as threats as well. So some examples within the laws of the Taliban back when they were in charge of Afghanistan for, about a decade or so. This is going into the 90s and early 2000s. Men had to grow beards and cut their mustaches. The whole thing about laughing was not allowed. Suits and ties are forbidden. You had to wear typical Islamic dress, or was for them typical Islamic dress. No photographs. Can't display pictures. No flight kaying or birds as pests. I still don't get that, but whatever. All children must have Muslim names. All non-Muslims must wear yellow clothes and carry a yellow cloth. Where does that sound familiar? Just let that sink in for a sec. Muslim families may not listen to music. Thief and adultery and all crimes probably are against religious laws are punished by public amputation or execution, as well as in this case a destruction of a big, and this I don't remember if this was the Taliban or ISIS, destroying this big Buddhist statue somewhere in the Middle East. All right. So Taliban presence unfortunately has not gone away in the last 19 years. It has been a big resurgence, and they've never really gone away, and are now kind of at that table where they want to say, and they keep talking about peace talks, but are constantly attacking various parts of Afghanistan. And, you're constantly hearing about suicide attacks and attacks on the government and on the civilian populations, because essentially they are going to continue to do this until they have some form of control back over the country. And I don't know how that's going to end. But again, it's that thing. And a lot of people in Afghanistan do not want the Taliban at all. But there's still obviously people that want it, not a very large percentage, but they're also a very strong group too, because of outside funding and because of other things that draw more people into being, with them. Within ISIS, ISIS stood for the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIL with the L instead of Iraq and Syria, Iraq and the Levant, which was essentially Syria. And so, for, 3 or 4 years, there were this massive territory holding in Iraq and Syria as a result of, Iraq with its own infighting, Syria with its own civil war, and kind of developing out of religious tension. And again, if we had more time, we'd examine that more. But essentially, they were destroying historical stuff, not just religious statues. In this case, they're destroying religious artifacts. Anything that they find offensive, they would, take down. And that would be the ultimate destruction, is to destroy anything that was not considered, authentic Islam in their sense, or the right way to be a Muslim. And so they would kill people that they found, in their way or that resisted them. And so, that's a cause for conflict, is anything that they find offensive is a reason for extremism. And we tie that back into Al-Qaeda and 9/11 in a little bit of a sense of the threat that, many Muslims, or at least, again, the fundamentalist extremist Muslims that we're talking about, looked at the United States and Western values as a threat to their culture, in the sense that, they'll become, bad people. They're going to, fall into sin. They're going to, drink. They're going to do drugs. They're going to, have multiple relationships and, father a bunch of illegitimate children, and they're going to turn away from the Quran and the Word of God. And that was, that was what they were essentially pushing and saying, that this is what was going to happen, and this is what we're fighting to preserve, is the true tenets of the religion. And they're not the only ones that have done that, but, in terms of pushing for, religious protections to preserve the religion, you find other people too who say that pop culture is a threat to that as well, but just maybe not necessarily pushing for religious violence, but instead secluding themselves in their own, belief system. All right. So switching gears now to Israel and Jerusalem. So as we said, Jerusalem is this holy site for all three Abrahamic religions because they all have big ties to it, and that has caused a lot of tension within Israel. But also, you have this other thing within Israel in the sense that Jews were kicked out of Israel about 2,000 years ago by the Romans, and have slowly returned over time, predominantly over the last 200 years, but the majority coming in right after World War I, and especially after World War II and since then. And so when they talked about building a Jewish state, they were talking about that following World War I with the idea of what's called Zionism, and that's essentially the idea of the creation of the state of Israel. That was where Jews felt that they were going to be the most safe, was in a country of their own, and not necessarily being in these small communities throughout Europe and North America and everywhere else. And essentially the United Nations said, okay, after the Holocaust happened, they said we have to create a Jewish state to give them a safe haven. And so here you can see in 1947, number of Palestinian settlements to Jewish settlements, Jews were not a very large part of Palestine. And so when they partitioned the land, it was done in a weird way, kind of essentially, following, the settlements, but also giving Israel, the Jewish people, way too much territory in comparison to that, with Jerusalem supposed to be under United Nations administration. And essentially what happened was, the instant Israel became a country, the Arab states around it got really angry because, well, now you have a bunch of people that are coming in, taking land, taking resources. And so it's not just a religious conflict, but it's also a political and social conflict, an economic one as well. So here was the partition. A lot of land was lost really quickly from the Israelis to, the Egyptians, to the Palestinians, but that was, Jordan and, Syria and Iraq and other countries, and Saudi Arabia. And so what happened was the Jews slowly took over the land over, the last, 70-ish, 60-ish odd years through various forms of warfare, some initiated by the Arab neighbors, some initiated by the Jews in Israel. And so essentially what you're looking at now is, the present here is, the Gaza Strip, and then here is the West Bank, both ruled under different authorities. And they're trying to come up with some sort of peace plan, but at the same time, the Jewish people continue to encroach on territories in the West Bank, which again we'll talk about in the sense of, building a wall and segregation, but also limiting the amount that Palestinians get, and their abilities and their means of control and everything else. And again, there's a reading on this that's more in depth, but also within the Gaza Strip, are there any resources that are brought in? And there's a whole more complex argument that could be, not an argument, more complex discussion on this, because there's so much history there. But it's not just religious. Religion is a very large part of it because of Jerusalem being a holy site for Islam as well as Christianity and Judaism, that no one wants to give up Jerusalem. But also there is economic resources, there is, access to safe water for drinking, electricity, things like that. And, Israel having the military might and the power and the money to continually put pressure and can take over more and more land. So we'll stop the video here, but, we're going to talk about this more in class, and then also read about more of this stuff as well. And then also the idea of religious conflicts here in America, to a somewhat extent. All right, but others will expand on more with the ethnicity and political chapters as well.